Hello to all learners who will begin this lecture with me today. As you may have seen, the topic of discussion for this lesson is role theory in search of unity. I will begin by providing a short overview of what I wish to accomplish through the lecture. The lecture is intended to guide students to understand the intellectual movement from grand theories such as those of Auguste Comte or Karl Marx, which characterize the earlier half of sociology's development as a subject, to how micro aspects of life became more of a concern to the latter-day sociologists. Aspects of society that exist at the micro level, like language, nonverbal communications, or any other form of communication, group participation, membership, suspension of membership in groups, tolerance, selection and execution of social actions, etc., become sites to locate and explain human behavior in what is known as the microsociology of role theory. As compared to the classical theories in sociology, interaction theory, of which role theory is a part, is only a recent development. Its origins can be traced back to the mid and latter half of 20th century. In short, the four main points to be remembered throughout the lecture are as follows. The first is role theory marks the development of sociological theories that depend on microsocial interactions. The second is it is opposed to the grand theories that characterize the earlier half of sociology's development as a subject. The third is that the theory shows how micro aspects of life can construct the social reality of individuals. And lastly, as compared to the classical theories in sociology, role theory, which is also a part of interaction theory, is only a recent development, and its origins go back to the mid and latter half of the 20th century, that is from 1930s to the 1980s. In order to understand the relevance of role theory, we must consider a few things. The first thing is that role theory speaks of individual behavior and not that of large social structures. And by large social structures, I mean how institutions are arranged, such as political units, nations, or even kinship systems. The second is that role theory places importance on the individual or the actor, but care must be taken to also know that individuals are not entirely separated from broader structures or even collective behavior. Individual behavior is also very intricately linked to collective behavior. The third, fourth, and fifth points that have been laid out shows how a large part of role theory speaks of human perception. For example, men and women behave differently since they already have a perception of the existing roles based on gender. This also establishes that social structures create social expectations which then individuals adhere to. So, role theory deals with the organization of social behavior at the individual and at the collective levels. In fact, individual behavior gains meaning in the form of roles only when organized in social contexts. Role theory successfully aids in understanding all three levels of society, that is, the micro, macro, and the intermediate levels. The lecture aims to achieve three goals. Students will understand the importance of seemingly insignificant aspects of life which can become objects of social investigation. For example, Anthony Giddens speaks of the many insights that international tourists may provide of a new country they visit. For many who are not acquainted with a culture, may find certain cultural practices quite surprising, when for the said culture it is a common occurrence and is often built into their daily routines. In addition to this, students will also understand the structural approach to understanding human behavior, or roles as the theory states. Role theory tries to study how social structures define roles and ensure their perpetuation. Let's look at the learning outcomes of this lesson. There are basically 4 learning outcomes that I wish to shed light on. First, the lecture will familiarize students with more nuanced concepts in sociology, such as the idea of social construction of reality, as was made popular by Peter L. Berger and Thomas Luckman. Berger and Luckman argued that society, which is created through human interactions, is comprised of a process of institutionalization. Institutionalization is the process by which individuals constructed their social reality through observations, mutual agreements between actors, assigning roles, etc. The second concept is of the postmodernist interest in subjectivity, which means that perceptions emerge from a subject's or actor's point of view. In fact, closely related to the idea of Berger and Luckman, subjectivity plays a crucial role in understanding social positions and individual choice, both of which are necessary for the construction of social realities. The third idea is of cultural assumptions, which draws its definition from another interactionist theorist called Harold Garfinkel. Cultural assumptions are often unsaid aspects of an interaction, which ultimately decides if an action can be successfully executed between 2 or more actors. The fourth and the last concept that students will understand is that of reflexivity, concept which is widely used in social research and is also termed at times as self-reference. Reflexivity involves the researcher to be self-critical and self-aware, such that one is cognizant of his or her interpretation. The act of reflexivity brings a humanistic approach to a rather distant or objective endeavor, which is now approached with what some may call empathy. We will now move into understanding what interaction theory is and how role theory became a part of the interactionist perspective movement. We must also know the broader theoretical framework of which role theory is a part. At the outset, let's do a small exercise. Have you ever observed how people act or behave differently in different situations? In all probability, the answer will be yes. In fact, we may observe our own behavior to support the statement. The question then is, why do we act differently in different social contexts? This is the precise objective of interaction theorists, also called social interactionists. The answer to the question that was asked is that we as actors are constantly in a meaning-making process, such that we make sense of the world around through communicating and interacting with other actors. As social contexts change, individual actors perform different roles in different social contexts. In these contexts, expectations from each role is different, and hence the difference in behavior. Thus, role theory, which analyzes social roles that actors play, is a part of the broader intellectual perspective known as social interactionism. Let us now look at what a role is. We will now streamline our discussion to first understand what a social role is. The diagram given indicates that an individual can occupy or perform multiple roles in a lifetime. I have mentioned a few such roles on the diagram, such as familial roles of being parents to children, of being a daughter, son, grandfather, uncle, aunt, or a niece. It can be a gender role of being female, male, transgender, intersex, or transsexual. It may be of a professional or occupational role of a teacher, doctor, company manager, or a railway pilot. It can also be the roles we fulfill as citizens of a country. Social roles therefore comprise of the following characteristics. The first is that it is a set of social expectations. The second is that roles are linked to actions. Third, each role calls for a different set of behavior. And the fourth, inability to fulfill roles may invite sanctions. For instance, an individual may face ridicule for being a bad parent, or a person may lose a job for failing to perform well at the workplace. We now look at some key definitions offered by theorists across time to understand this concept of social role. For this, I have pointed out two sets of definitions. The first is by theorist Ralph Linton, who in 1936 gave us a definition of social roles based on status. He stated, and I quote, "A role represents the dynamic aspect of status. The individual is assigned to a status and occupies it with relations to other statuses. When he puts the rights and duties into effect, he is performing a role. There are no roles without statuses and no statuses without role." The key points to note in Linton's definition are that every individual occupies a social status. Role is the dynamic aspect of status, and social statuses and roles are essential for one another to exist. The second definition is that of George Herbert Mead, who spoke in terms of role taking. Here I quote Mead, who said, "We learn how to act and behave in social situations through the process of imitation and role taking." The points to note in Mead's definition are as follows. The first is social roles evolve as they interact with other persons. The second is role taking involves the perspective of others, and roles are indispensable for social interaction. We will now look at George Herbert Mead's contributions in detail. Chronologically speaking, G.H. Mead carried out his work on role taking in 1934. He was interested in understanding the development of the self, which he consciously separated from the individual. To Mead, how a person behaves is based on how he anticipates the responses of others. Role taking is therefore a way of internalizing the behaviors and responses of others. Roles, to Mead, are responses to the behaviors of these generalized others, such that these roles can be many, and the entire community or social group at one point can become an individual's generalized other. For instance, a child can play or take the role of a doctor and act out a behavior in response to a patient. As we move further, around the same year, that is 1934, G.H. Mead's theory of self and role taking was developing. There was another theorist called Joseph L. Moreno, and his work was gaining momentum in the field of psychiatry. His interest in social roles and interactions led him to understand social roles in two main categories. The first are psychosomatic roles that individuals may engage in from birth or at times even pre birth. These roles are responses to the needs of the body, such as if a child sleeps more, they may be termed as the sleeper. So they play the role of a sleeper. The more complex roles, however, according to J.L. Moreno, develops as one grows older. These complex roles fall within what Moreno calls psychodramatic roles. Individuals may employ these as and when the need arises and terminates their use when no longer needed. Some techniques that comprise these psychodramatic roles are doubling, mirroring, and role reversals, all of which, to a certain extent, speaks of playing the role of others. A person in his entire lifetime may observe the behaviors of others to form a role conserve from which selected roles may be performed again. We now go back to a theorist whose definition of social roles we discussed earlier. This is Ralph Linton's idea of social roles. In 1936, Linton developed his theory of social roles by dividing roles into two based on its nature, whether it is static or whether it is dynamic. The static aspect of a social role comprise of statuses. These statuses are positions designated to individuals, such as a barber or a chef. On the other hand, the dynamic aspect of roles comprise of behaviors and their enactments. Roles itself are, as pointed out by Linton, the dynamic aspect of status, as behaviors and enactments can transform and alter over time. Linton termed roles to be dynamic in nature. A very important analysis of social roles was, however, provided by Robert K. Merton, who spoke of a concept called role set. Both Linton and Merton accepted that an individual can take on many roles in society. Statuses and roles to Linton were dynamic in nature and were subject to constant change and alteration. However, Merton enhanced Linton's position to state that each status may further comprise of many roles, which he termed as a role set. While Merton calls his departure from Linton's theory to be small, he is quick to note and observe that it is not just many statuses and hence many roles that an individual may perform, but rather a single status may consist of an array of roles. Merton states, and I quote, "By role set, I mean that complement of role relationships in which persons are involved by virtue of occupying a particular social status." He cites the example of a medical student who is not only a student to his teachers, but harbor other sets of relationships with fellow students, social workers, physicians, nurses, etc. A similar example is that of a school teacher whose relations with his pupils, colleagues, board members, principal, and local organizations may call for different roles to be played. Merton had also made a difference between role set and multiple roles. Merton makes it very obvious that his term role set is different and separate from what sociologists have so long termed as multiple roles. While role set are the complex of roles within a single social status, multiple roles are the complex of roles associated with multiple statuses, such as a father can be a professor, church leader, or a conservative party member. However, each distinct status has its own role set. Merton believed that the wide number of statuses that individuals occupy may be called a status set in order to understand this very difference. As we move further, you may come across two important concepts while discussing social roles, and these are that of role conflict and role strain. The array of roles that theorists have spoken of so far may not necessarily be adequately synchronized, such that individuals performing many roles may find it difficult to execute each distinct role with the same precision, time, effort, or even adequacy. For example, a teacher may find it difficult to complete his or her duties of a researcher or an author. Similarly, a father who coaches his son's team may not be able to carry out his fatherly duties while training the team. A similar conflict may arise when one fails to perform the accepted gender roles in society. A woman who is professionally successful may be ostracized for failing to perform her domestic duties and may invite the labels of a bad mother or a bad wife. Similar to role conflict lies the next concept of the role strain. The concept of role strain arises when actors or individuals fail to meet the demands of a particular social role. Unemployment among men, for instance, may cause psychological distress as it directly goes against the claim that men must be breadwinners. Society may strip the qualities we associated with being a man or masculinity, causing a role strain. Cumulative anxieties of this nature may amount to social anxiety. Usually, it is observed that when societal expectations are greater, the inability to perform those roles may generate a greater social anxiety or strain. As we near the end of this lesson, we will also look at the kind of groundwork that role theory has laid down before us. Firstly, at the core of social roles, expectations, conflict, or even strain is the individual or the person. A theory of social roles explains the relationship individuals have not only with the fellow members of a group, association, or community, but also how formations and dissolutions, greater structures, may occur in the process of interactions. This is also shown in the picture which is given on the slide, and you can locate the person at the very center. In the end, we will look at what kind of groundwork role theory lays down before us. Firstly, at the core of social roles, expectations, conflict, or even strain is the individual or person. This is visible in the picture which is given on the slide. At the center lies the person. A theory of social roles explains the relationship individuals have not only with the fellow members of a group, association, or community, but also how formations and dissolutions of greater structures may occur in the process of interactions. Role theory therefore lays out the foundations to understand how relations may exist in a rapidly changing and globalized world. The second aspect that role theory brings back into discussion is that role theory, in a very simple manner, brings back the debate on whether a theoretical concern should be with the parts or with the totality or the whole. Lastly, and a very important point, is that recent theorists have placed great importance on role theory's unifying nature, especially the one that reduces the gap between individualism and collectivism. While some may understand roles to be an expression of personality, others have spoken of how roles play an integral part in ensuring a person's engagement with the world of culture. So, this is what role theory stands for. There are a number of questions that I have listed out for you for further discussion. There is also a list of referred books and journals are also provided for further reading. The lesson, therefore, has given us a fairly good understanding of what roles are. At the very outset, the idea of roles happened to be very rudimentary and was defined as certain actions or behaviors of persons bearing societal expectations and which may at times call for social sanctions. However, as we moved further, we looked at how other social concepts tend to be closely linked to the idea of social roles, such as statuses, conflicts, and strains. Our movement in this discussion on social roles or role theory has been one which has moved from simple to complex. At the very beginning, the definition of social role was rather rudimentary. Definitions dealt with simpler concepts of roles, being set of actions based on societal expectations, which may invite sanctions if played or performed inadequately. However, as the discussion progressed, roles were explained in relation to social status, conflict, strain, and anxieties. Joseph L. Moreno and George Herbert Mead successfully utilized the idea of play to explain how individuals may assume a certain social role. But the future of role theory must also be discussed. Despite its application in a wide number of disciplines, role theories seem to provide newer perspectives on social interaction, such as the idea of role transitions. Role transitions may aid in understanding why certain roles comprising of certain behaviors or actions are discontinued while new ones are adopted. The idea is important to understand the needs of a changing society where old ways of life cannot completely be rejected and may face a certain degree of resistance before becoming completely obsolete. As an example, families consisting of members may resist a breakdown despite being dysfunctional or unhappy. This occurs when individuals today have the option of divorcing and playing the role of divorcees, but earlier social orders may idealize primary marriages and families which may still have currency in society. More recently, role theory has been utilized to explain social stereotypes, where it was found that social differences pertaining to sex, race, occupation, class, or even education may carry with it certain stereotypical roles that are a product of historical, social, and economic forces. In the end, role theory has been employed to develop symbolic interactionist perspectives which heavily relied on the structural approach. Recent studies have given more importance to actors or persons, and their agency has been studied to understand ways in which roles are reversed, altered, or at times rejected. At the core of such explanations lies the preference and likes of actors and how they intend themselves to be seen. Recent suggestions have also included the incorporation of ideas such as roles being mediators, such that individuals utilize role mediations to participate in social reality. Roles, therefore, act as a mediator between personality and the world of culture, as has been mentioned before. In this regard, the aspect of continuity may also be looked into to explain why certain roles continue to be performed while others cease to exist. I have also listed out some questions for you at the end. You may look at it for practice, and a list of referred books and journals are also provided for further reading. Thank you.